Welcome to Programming with Qt Widgets. In this episode, I'll do something slightly different. I will live code a solution for you to an example where we paint. The reason why I do this is for you to follow along. If I just show you the solution, it will be less sticky in your brain than if I walk you and I talk through. I would do this, or I could have done that, and so on. So let's get started. So what I'm going to show you here now is a solution to this exercise that you see over here. We have a number of bars that have a different percentage value. They have different colors. They have text inside them. And actually, the data that comes into this is just add bar. Very, very simple API, because that's not what we're going to be interested in. What we will be interested in is that I should be able to click on one of these, and then it should be highlighted one way or the other. And that is going to be more difficult than you might think at first. Let's get to the code. The code, as always, starting out in main.cpp, because that's where everything goes on. Bar chart, that's a Qt widget. It has a number of add bars, and you see Germany 80%, France 51%, and so on. And it shows it and resizes it and call the exec. So let's look at bar chart. It's, as I said, a Qt widget subclass. It has a paint event, otherwise it wouldn't be seen on the screen. And if I run it here now, you can see that it says paint me. I can resize the window, it'll say paint me in the center of the screen, but it's not going to show me any bars. My add bar method takes these parameters here, and they are added to a instance of a class bar, and that is a very simple struct, and I have a vector of these structs. Vector would be the default go-to in Qt 5 and Qt 6. It doesn't matter whether it's a QList or QVector, and I would likely call it a QList because by now I just call all my lists for QLists. I know vector and list is the same, but if this was a Qt 5 code base that I was still working on, it would make a difference. And once I've added all my bars, or once I've added one bar, I call update. Update means that it will be scheduled for repainting this widget eventually. And eventually will be when I get back to the event loop. So I call add bar a number of times. I call update, but there's only going to be one repaint. That's the setup. Let's go over and look here and see where will we start. We'll start by painting 0% and 100%. We'll do that in our paint event. I'll go to my paint event, and I have an instance of a Qt Painter that I'm drawing on. And let's just go right up here right away to do some best practices. Namespace. And in my namespace, I'll have a bunch of constants, and that's the constants that I'll be using. So one of them is going to be a margin. Let's make it 10 pixels. That is the margin that you see from here up to, so the edge margins that I have here. And the reason why I make that 10 pixel is to avoid writing, or not the reason why I make 10 pixels, the reason why I make it a constant is to avoid 10, and sometimes I will know, oh, divided by 2, that's 5, and then I'll write 5, and it'll be all of a sudden much harder to see. Another thing I'll do right away is that I'll use my coordinate transformation. I'll translate down to this point here being 0,0, and that way I know that when I paint that, I will not need to worry about that. And also let's scale so that this distance that we have here is say, no, let's not do that. That's going to confuse you. We could have scaled and made this distance 100, but then I would need to be super careful with using QRectF, and it's really only two places that I need to worry about that. So 0,0 up there. So margin 10, I start here. I'll start out by saying painter.translate margin, comma margin, and That means that I already have a new constant, because the width that we have here now is the width of the screen minus a margin there and a margin there. So let's call that chart width, because I'm going to use that through a few different places. I don't have it right yet, but I will have it, well, no, I don't have it right up here because it depends on the width, which I know in my paint event. But in my paint event, I can now set chart width equal to width minus 2 times margin. The height of the bars is also going to be interesting. So bar height, and likely, well, maybe not. Let's see. I need to paint the text here first. So let's start with this. I need to paint at 0,0, but if I draw text with the QPoint API, that actually needs to be this point that I specify. But if I do it with QRect, then I will be specifying the rect. I'll show you a small trick here. If I just create a rect from here all the way over to there, then I can paint both of these within the same rect. So I will say QRects, rects at 0,0, and the width, that is chart width, and the height, that should be the height of my text. But well, what is the height of the text? Well, that depends on the metrics or the font height. So I'll go and ask for font metrics that I can get from the painter. What font was set on the painter's font metrics, and int text height. I'm not going to reuse that again, so there's no reason to put it up here. Text height is equal to metrics dot height. And now let's actually put this in here. I like doing scoping like this when I paint stuff, because then it also makes it easier for me to add some comment here, like paint header. Okay, that's the char height, and that's the char width, and then the text height, that is the rectangle that starts at this point here and end at that point down there. Okay, painter, not painter, just p.draw text. There is a number of overload of draw text on my QPainter, as we'll see here now. It got me right away to the one with QPoint, but I seldomly like to use that one. I rather like to use the one down here with QRect, or the one up here with QRect F, and that's a floating point precision, which is important if I start scaling. But let's do draw text here with the rects, and I'll go back over here and see what did it otherwise say. Say int flags, and I did try read here, didn't find any information, but up here in the rect F it tells me the flags is one of these, namely the alignment. So Qt align left and Qt align vertical center, align v center, and then finally the text that I want to write, 0%. And let me just copy this line down here, if I can figure out how to do that. It's all in my fingers. There we are. Because the 100% is super, not 1,000, 100% is super easy, because all I need to do is to align to the right, because I have the whole rectangle laid out for both sides. Obviously, the 0% is not going to take the whole width of the screen. It will be aligned left, so it'll be sitting over there, and with the rectangle going all the way over to the other side, it will be working fine. Bar height is not specified yet, but you can see 0%, 100%, there's a bit of margin here, a bit of margin there, there and there, and if I resize, it looks perfectly okay. Let's get the line underneath it now here, which is relatively easy to do too now, because I will now draw a rectangle, and if we just go back here, I have this rectangle sitting up here well, I'm not draw a rectangle, I'll draw a line, but I see the rectangle sitting up here. This point in the rectangle is called bottom left. This is called bottom right. So I can now simply say p dot draw line from rect dot, and that's I think I hinted at that in a previous episode, that it's worthwhile to go and look at these helper classes, because some of them actually can do some nifty little things for you. Bottom right. Me, on the other hand, I can't type, think, and speak at the same time, which is why you'll see these errors. But now my computer is thinking, it's compiling, and it takes a bit of time because my computer is also screen scraping while we're talking here. Oh, come on, I'm just trying to stall time. And there is your line underneath. Let's go and look at the example over here. If I can find it. There we are. Example, we have a dotted line here and here and here. And those I'll be drawing next. So I will be drawing those lines, and the left side of those is, well, it'll start at the bottom right. So I can say, well, first of all, I need to set the pen to be dotted. So I'll have the pen P, my painter, set pen. It takes a Q pen, not a Q point, a Q pen, and the Q pen constructor. I cannot remember the arguments here. The color, that's not enough because I want the pen style. The color is likely black and one, so yeah. Pen style QT : : dot line. There we are. Now I've set a pen to be a dot line. I will draw a line from 2 points. There's a number of overload for draw line. There's one for Q points too. And it's my rect dot bottom left. So the bottom left, that's where it should start. And then to a Q point. And I know that it's actually position 0, comma, and then chart bottom. And chart bottom, that is slightly more difficult for me to figure out now, because I've already started translating. I have translated margins down, so we'll say here chart bottom is the height of the screen minus the upper margin minus the bottom margin. So the margin at the top that I already translated, the margin at the bottom that I do not want to get down to, that's the bottom here. And I better run that to see that I actually got it right before I start trying to get the one at the right and the one in the center correct. And it seems like I did. Yeah, there's a few spaces here. So I certainly did get it right. Okay, draw the other one. That's an easy one. Draw bottom right. And this time it is actually rect dot right. That is the right side of the rectangle. Now I need to find the center of this rectangle. So I need to find the x coordinate for that. Inch x equal to, and that's rect dot right minus rect dot left, and divided by 2. That's the x coordinate that I want to draw at. So p dot draw line and Q point x comma, and where am I? Rect dot bottom comma Q point x comma, and then I had chart bottom. And let's see if that works. And while it's compiling, do enjoy that I created a variable here, x, and I have another chart bottom up here, but they all go out of scope when I hit this one. So when I start again doing the painting of the next bits, I don't need to worry about these instance variable. That's why I like to have the scoping here, so I don't need to worry about. And that should have been a comma. And it looks like I did managed to get these 3 lines drawn correct. The next is drawing the bars themselves. Drawing the bars, I'll definitely go out and start a new one here. Actually, that's an easy one because I need to go through all my bars, and I have this m_bars, and that's the bars that I'm going through here. What I need to do now is, first of all, if I go over to my screenshot here, I'll see that I have, this is 0,0. I would like to move down so that this was 0,0, because then I can move down further and make this 0,0 and move down there. This being 0, 0, see what I did there? Now this point is equal to that point up there, and this is equal to that point up there when I went through. And if I just translate all the time, then things will be going good. So I need to translate first down to this point here. I need to do that outside of my loop. So I will say p.translate, and the point that is, I'm not going to change the x, but well, actually that's a rect dot well, let's make it a bit more explicit. Rect dot bottom. Now I've translated. I needed to do that up there. That's where that rect made it slightly. Okay, sometimes you need to. Damn, I would have liked to have that outside. I don't know. I just got an attack of needing to do things entirely right, but you can fix up the code here afterwards just to make it look better. So now I translate it. Anyway, I translated, so this is 0,0 now, and I'll start out by saying rect.translate, and I'll translate the x, not rect, p.translate. I'll translate my coordinates not in the x but down with margin, so that there is a margin space in between that line, and we'll start there, and once I'm done down here, then between there, and so on. There we are. Now I'll translate that. I need to paint my rectangle that represents the bar, and so eventually I would like to do something like paint draw rects like this. So we'll need to figure out the rects. qrects. It now I've translated down, so it started 0,0. The width is bar dot value divided by 100, because remember in our main I was looking at that 80, that's 80%. Should have been 0.80 as a double, but I'll divide it by 100 here now, and then multiplied by the width of the area, and I think we got that up here. Chart width, there we are. That's the width of the area. And that's where it could have been slightly better had I done a scale on the chart area, but well, that's anyway the width, and then the height, that is the bar height. Did we even initialize that at some point? We have it up there. We did not. Well, the bar height is the text, so Q font metrics down here. I guess this scoping I did here starts to be a bit annoying, so we can take that out of the scope at least. And then here it says bar height, that's the text height, and plus a half a margin on each side, so that's margin. And there we are. Okay, now I am drawing my rectangle is 0, 0. It's a bar value, blah blah. That's working out. That's all good. What I just need now is to change the brush. So set brush, and the brush on my painter is my bar dot brush, bar dot color. That was the color in there. And draw rect. I draw this rectangle here with this brush. That looks all good. And I also need to draw the text inside there. And this is where using the rectangle is really nice, because now Qt colon align center, comma, and then bar dot text, bar dot what, label. There we are. Now inside that rectangle, I simply align it, and it'll take care of the margin down, or half a margin down on each side, and so on. The stuff that I had up here, half a margin on each side, because my bar height is larger than the text height. Now I've drawn this rectangle, and before I continue my loop there, let's also just say p.translate once more, translate, and again, not going to translate actually, let's just translate to bottom left. That should be just perfectly okay, because my left side of the rectangle is 0, and the bottom is the height of the rectangle plus the input, which was 0. And let's hope that everything works now.
There is an alternative to Qt Widgets, called QML. And if that's of interest to you, maybe starting out with a training is not a bad idea. But if you already know QML, then we also have you covered. We do have both introduction and advanced QML trainings.
And there we are, almost everything working. See, my outline here are dotted in. And why are they dotted? Well, that's because I set the pen to be a dotted pen above there somewhere. I set the pen to be a dotted line, and I did not change the pen further on, which is somewhat a bad thing to do. So maybe up here right away I should have set it back, or maybe down here where I'm about to draw my rectangle, I simply should say set the pen to be a Qt solid line. And let's compile again, and this time hopefully we'll see that the bars are working out just as I expected, with a solid line around them. And we already did see the color in there. It is not the same value as we saw in up here. There is France, and see, that's not the same, but I actually did check my can I have both of them at the same time? I cannot. Never mind. They are not just, oh, there they are. They're not the same. Oh, come on, give me a break. But somebody has been in the code and changed France's value after this screenshot was taken. Something like that. The values are good enough according to main.cpp. So far, so good. Now to the optional step. Well, let me just first see that it actually does scale as I expected. It doesn't do anything here, and but I did not do anything to avoid that. How would I do that? Well, I need to figure out what is the height here, and then I would need to set the size hint so that it couldn't scroll less than that. Or if I had a long bar here, maybe I should have it all inside of a Q scroll area or Q abstract scroll area, depending on my use case, which would give me a scroll bar that I could scroll. But that's for another day. So now I need to be able to click on these bars and highlight them. But how do I do that? Well, let's just take a step back and realize that when I painted the pixels on the screen, they were just basically going into a raster area with some colors in some small containers. So there will be a red color in here and a black color there, and nothing have been set up beyond that. So what do I do about that? Well, I actually need to remember where I painted it, so that when I get a mouse area or mouse press event, that I can get back to that. And that might feel like very dirty to you, and if it does, I will encourage you to wait another year until an episode comes out on QGraphics View, or look at QGraphics View yourself, because QGraphics View is exactly like an area where there's objects. So USA here, the text would be an object, the rectangle around it would be an object, USA would actually be an object inside of that rectangle, and the event handling on the rectangle. The event handling right now, where's that happening? Well, that's happening on the whole canvas here. But if I was using QGraphic View, I would get event handling in there, and that would be all perfectly okay. But without that, I need to remember inside my bar, where was it painted? And for that, let's go and create a QRect, painted rects. That is the area that was painted, and just to speed things up, is selected. I will need that shortly, equal to, let's make that false. I'll need that shortly. But first, now that I have my rectangles here, I will want to remember where they were painted. So I'll say bar, and that was why it was nice for me to have bar reference rather than just a copy of bar, because now I'm actually updating the bar in the container in bars. Bar.painted rects is equal to the rectangle painted up there. I am making a mistake, I know, but I'm trying to prove a point. So remember that. So painted rect is now the rectangle up there, and then I will go and implement, just go up here and say, can you please implement for me a mouse press event? There we are, yes please. And I got a protected mouse event here, that's all cool. And my mouse press event, well, QPoint equal to event pointer pose. That's the position the mouse was pressed. I will go through each of my bars here, and I will say bar pointer, pointer dot is selected is equal to whether bar dot painted rect dot contains this point. That way I will update all of my bars, whether when I click somewhere, I'll run through all of my bars and I'll set this is selected. Of course, I could have just remembered the position somewhere, and then in my paint event, I could have gone through and checked whether it was inside that potato. Yeah, I would likely have done that had I thought about it a few more minutes. But now in my paint event, when I draw my bar, I set the brush to be the color here, and I'll say if bar dot is selected, then it should be qt : is that how you spell gray and cute? Otherwise it should be this color, selected. And let's see if it works. It doesn't, but I know why, but hopefully you'll learn something from the mistake I just did here, and I am keeping you in the loop of this mistake because I did a whole new recording of this episode, because last time I got it wrong by something super stupid that I can tell you about when I get to that code. It is coming up and running now, and clicking here, nothing happens. Let's resize, nothing happens. Can I not force any of them? I cannot. The reason why I'm trying to resize is there is the bug that, why would I resize? Force? Right, so when I pressed here and I updated it's selected, I of course need a new repaint event. That's why I try to resize, because I need to update. But there is a much more grave error in here, namely that the rects that I have here, that one, what is that x coordinate? That is 0, because I translated it in. And it's likely the y coordinate is also 0 because I had it up at the top. So what I really need to do is now go from the coordinate system that has been translated into the coordinate system of the widget. And that's where I can get to that. Remember, we talked about transformations, and there was this transform metrics, and now I have a Q transform that represents the transformation going from the coordinate system of the widget out into this. And if I now transform this rect that is now somewhere deep in there saying 0,0, well, the transform is transforming from my transform into the global. So this transform that I have here is what all the painting is going through. I have a rectangle that should be painting from 0,0 to 100,100. What coordinates on the widget should be painted, and that's what the transform is transforming. And then, so this is the transform, and then it has a map rect that is mapping the rectangle to this transform one. And the error I did was that I had this line here sitting after my translate, which meant that all my painting, all my clicking was off by the height of the rectangle, and gee, that was super annoying. But now click, 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 click outside, and it works. And the way that it works is that when I click here, I go through all of my bars and I update the bar to whether it's this point is inside of the painted rectangle. I want to just go up here and click right there and go down there and click right there, and you can see it is actually click right here. It is the right coordinates. There is no error that is offsetting. If that was too annoying, well, as I said, there's a few changes that I could have done. I could just have remembered this position as being m_press pose, and then up here I could have tested. Then I would have to take that I would need to have the inverse transformation, because the press pose would need to be transformed into the coordinate system, the coordinate system where the rect was in, to be able to do rect.contains. But that's just p.transform.inverse and then map or whatever. In any case, if that is too annoying for you, I can't urge you enough to go and look at QGraphics U. But in many situations, you just have something simple like this, and in those situations, just adding the painted rect to your data structure is just fine. That was it. Seemed easy, right? Yes, I had to take this 4 times because I got myself into some stupid error somewhere. And it's super, super important that when you do this code, that you go through your code and you do reviews a lot of time, because the painting code can easily become a piece of spaghetti if you do not carefully maintain it. And one of the most careful things is to have these constants that we saw, the margin, the char width, the bar height, and so on. Make sure that you have these constants and that you have a good scoping, so you don't have enormous amount of variables that is referenced all over the place. But if you do that, painting do not necessarily need to be much more complex than this, at least not for simple use cases like this. That was it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed the time spent trying to actually type it out here. I'll urge you to try and go and fetch from the URL below. You can get the code base that we have here, and you can start out with the same place that I started. Now try do it yourself, or take the solution and modify it to your heart's content. Until next time, have a great time.